I still remember the weight of those cold metal keys slipping from my trembling hand into my son's icy grasp that Christmas afternoon. The snap of my dignity breaking louder than any joyful carol. No one asked me, they just told me it was for my own good. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 73 years old. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment on Delancey Street, on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. The smell of stale coffee and dust lingers in every corner like ghosts of better days. Each morning, I shuffle through my routine in slippers worn thin at the heels. I prepare breakfast with hands that shake slightly now. I read my mail with reading glasses that always slide down my nose. I water my faded plants that sit on the windowsill, their leaves turning brown despite my care. Always, I am waiting. Waiting for a call. Waiting for a visit. Waiting for someone to remember that I exist. The silence in my apartment is thicker than the winter air outside. It wraps around me like a heavy coat I can't take off. The radiator clanks and hisses, but even that sound feels lonely. Sometimes I leave the television on just to hear human voices, even if they're strangers selling products I'll never buy. That Christmas morning started like any other. I woke up at 5:30, the way I always do now. Sleep became harder after Harold died 8 years ago. I made myself a cup of instant coffee, the cheap kind that tastes like burned water. I sat at my small kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg that I keep meaning to fix, and looked out my window at the empty street below. I had been looking forward to this Christmas for weeks. My son Michael had called the week before. His voice was different on the phone, distant but insistent. "Mom, we're going to have Christmas lunch at my place this year. The whole family will be there." I felt my heart flutter with hope. The whole family. That meant Michael and his wife Jennifer. My daughter Sarah and her husband Rob. My 3 grandchildren, Emma, who's 22 now and studying at Columbia. Jake, who's 19 and thinks he knows everything. And little Sophia, who's not so little anymore at 16. I spent hours preparing. I ironed my best dress, the navy blue one with the small roses that Harold always said made my eyes look brighter. I wrapped the gifts I had bought with money I couldn't really afford to spend. A silk scarf for Jennifer. A book about jazz history for Rob. $50 in an envelope for each of the grandchildren, money taken from my grocery budget for the next month. The subway ride to Brooklyn Heights took 45 minutes. I clutched my purse and the bag of gifts, watching my reflection in the dark windows flash by. My face looked older than I remembered. When did those lines around my eyes become so deep? When did my cheeks sink in like that? Michael's house was beautiful, as always. A brownstone worth over $1 million now, though I remember when he bought it 15 years ago for half that price. The money that helped him buy it came from the sale of my house in Queens. The house where I raised him and Sarah. The house where Harold and I spent 37 years building our life together. I rang the doorbell and waited. Through the frosted glass, I could see shapes moving inside. Voices. Laughter. They were already gathered without me. Michael opened the door. He's 48 now, still handsome but with a hardness around his eyes that wasn't there when he was a boy. "Mom," he said, not really smiling. "You made it." Behind him, I could see the others. Jennifer was in the kitchen, her blonde hair perfect as always. She barely looked up when I walked in. Sarah was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. The grandchildren were nowhere to be seen. "Where are the kids?" I asked, setting down my bag of gifts. "Upstairs," Sarah said without looking up from her screen. "They're busy." Busy. Too busy for their grandmother on Christmas. The lunch was a flurry of forced conversation and cold glances. We sat around Michael's dining room table, the expensive one with chairs that cost more than I spend on food in a month. Jennifer had made a ham that was dry and potatoes that were bland. No one asked if I needed help cutting my meat, even though my arthritis makes holding a knife painful sometimes. The conversation swirled around me like I wasn't there. They talked about their jobs, their investments, their plans for vacation. Michael mentioned something about expanding his portfolio, putting more money into cryptocurrency and gold. Jennifer laughed about the fortune they were making in the stock market. Their wealth in dollars seemed endless, growing every month while I counted pennies for my medication. I tried to join in. "How's work going, Sarah?" I asked my daughter. She looked at me like I had interrupted something important. "Fine, Mom. And the promotion you mentioned last month?" "I got it." She turned back to Michael, dismissing me with her tone. Anyway, as I was saying about the investment property, I felt invisible. Smaller with each passing minute. These people around the table, they were my family. My blood. But I felt like a stranger who had wandered into the wrong house. After lunch, we moved to the living room. The grandchildren finally came downstairs, but only because Jennifer called them. Emma gave me a quick hug that felt obligatory. Jake nodded in my direction. Sophia didn't even look at me. Grandma brought presents, Michael said, his voice flat. They opened their gifts like it was a chore. The envelopes with money disappeared into their pockets without a thank you. The scarf for Jennifer was set aside immediately. It's nice, Eleanor, she said, but I could tell she'd never wear it. Then came the conversation that changed everything. Michael sat down across from me, his expression serious. Jennifer stood behind him, her arms crossed. Sarah put down her phone and suddenly seemed very interested in the conversation. Mom, we need to talk, Michael said. My stomach tightened. Those words never led to anything good. We've been concerned about you, he continued. Living alone in that apartment. At your age. I'm fine, I said quickly. I manage just fine. Jennifer stepped forward. Eleanor, we've noticed things. You seem confused sometimes when we talk on the phone. You repeat yourself. Do I repeat myself? I tried to remember our recent conversations, but they were so rare, so brief. Maybe I did repeat things. When you live alone, sometimes you forget what you've already said. And that incident last month, Sarah added, when you called me crying about losing your keys, and then you found them in your purse. I remembered that day. I had been so scared, thinking someone had broken into my apartment. But the keys were exactly where I thought I'd left them. I had called Sarah in a panic, needing someone to help me feel safe. Instead, she'd made me feel foolish. We think, Michael said slowly, it might be time for you to consider other living arrangements. Other living arrangements. The words hit me like cold water. What do you mean? I whispered. There's a very nice senior community in Queens, Jennifer said, pulling out a brochure from somewhere. Had they planned this? How long had they been discussing my life behind my back? I took the brochure with shaking hands. Sunset Manor. It looked institutional. Clean but cold. Nothing like a home. It's assisted living, Sarah said. You'd have help with everything. Meals prepared for you. Someone to check on you every day. I don't need help with everything, I said. My voice sounded small and weak, even to me. Mom, Michael leaned forward, you can't drive anymore. Your reflexes aren't what they used to be. I take the subway everywhere. The subway isn't safe for someone your age. Someone your age? Like I was already dead. Like I was a problem to be solved instead of a person with feelings and opinions and the right to choose my own life. This place costs $3,000 a month, I said, looking at the brochure. We've worked it out, Jennifer said. If you sell your apartment, there should be enough money. My apartment. My home. The last piece of independence I had left. And, Michael said, reaching into his pocket, we think it would be better if I handled your finances from now on. To make things easier for you. That's when he held out his hand. Palm up. Waiting. Your keys, Mom. To the apartment. And your car, even though you shouldn't be driving anymore. The room went silent. Even the children upstairs seemed to stop moving. I could hear my heart beating in my ears. You want my keys? It's for your own good, Sarah said softly. We love you, Mom. This is love. Love. They were calling this love. I looked around the room at faces I had known for decades. Michael, the baby I had nursed through pneumonia when he was 3. Sarah, the little girl who used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms. These people I had sacrificed everything for, who I had loved more than my own life. And they wanted to put me away. Take away the last scraps of my independence. Make decisions for me like I was a child who couldn't be trusted. My hand moved to my purse. The keys were inside, attached to a keychain Harold had given me on our 20th anniversary. A small silver heart, now tarnished with age. Mom? Michael's voice was impatient now. The keys. I pulled them out slowly. The metal felt cold in my palm, but also familiar. Comforting. These keys opened my front door. My mailbox. Started my 14-year-old Honda that might not look like much but still ran perfectly well, thank you very much. I started to say something, but the words wouldn't come. It's okay, Jennifer said in the tone you'd use with a confused child. This is what's best. Best for whom? I wanted to ask. Best for me, sitting alone in some sterile room waiting to die? Or best for them, not having to worry about taking care of their inconvenient mother? But I didn't say that. Instead, I felt my hand open. The keys slipped from my trembling fingers into Michael's palm. He closed his fingers around them quickly, like he was afraid I might change my mind. Good, he said. This is good, Mom. You'll see. That's when something inside me snapped. Not broke. Snapped. Like a rubber band stretched too far. I stood up from my chair. Every eye in the room was on me. The children had even come to the top of the stairs to watch. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. Michael's neighborhood was beautiful. Tree-lined streets. Expensive cars. People with money and power who never had to worry about being treated like they were already dead. Then I turned around and faced my family. I need to use your bathroom, I said quietly. They all relaxed. Crisis averted. Mom was being reasonable. I walked slowly to the bathroom and closed the door behind me. My reflection in the mirror looked pale and shocked, but my hands weren't shaking anymore. I pulled out my phone. The old flip phone that Sarah was always making fun of, saying I should get a smartphone like everyone else. I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Eleanor Winters, I said quietly. I'm being held against my will at 247 Remsen Street in Brooklyn Heights. My family has taken my keys and is trying to force me into assisted living against my wishes. Ma'am, are you in immediate physical danger? I don't know, I said honestly. But they've taken my property without my permission, and they're threatening to control my finances. Officers are on their way, ma'am. Stay on the line. I hung up and flushed the toilet, ran the water, like I had actually been using the bathroom. Then I walked back out to the living room. No one looked at me. They were all talking quietly among themselves, probably making more plans for my life without asking me what I wanted. I sat down in my chair and waited. 12 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Michael looked confused. We're not expecting anyone, he said. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Michael opened the door to find two police officers standing on his front step. One was a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes. The other was a young Hispanic man who looked like he meant business. Good afternoon, the woman said. I'm Officer Martinez, this is Officer Rodriguez. We received a call about a possible elder abuse situation at this address. Michael's face went white. Elder abuse? There must be some mistake. May we come in, sir? They didn't wait for his answer. They walked into the living room where we were all still sitting, and Officer Martinez's eyes found mine immediately. Are you Eleanor Winters? I am. Did you call 911 today, ma'am? Every eye in the room turned to me. Sarah's mouth fell open. Jennifer took a step backward. The children on the stairs were staring like they were watching a movie. I did, I said clearly. Mom, Michael said, his voice tight with anger and embarrassment, what did you do? Officer Martinez held up a hand. Sir, please let Mrs. Winters speak for herself. She turned to me. Can you tell me what happened here today? And so I did. I told them about the forced conversation about my living situation. About how my family had demanded my keys without my consent. About how they were planning to take control of my finances and force me into a living situation I hadn't chosen. These are my car keys and apartment keys, I said, pointing to Michael's hand. He demanded them from me and I felt pressured to give them up, but I don't want to give up my independence. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. Sir, can you return Mrs. Winters' property to her please? Michael's face was red now. She's my mother. She's not capable of living alone anymore. Has she been declared incompetent by a court? Officer Martinez asked. Well, no, but then she has the right to make her own decisions about where she lives and who handles her finances. Michael reluctantly opened his hand. I stood up and walked over to him, taking my keys back. They felt warm now, heated by his angry grip. Officer Martinez walked me aside, speaking quietly. Mrs. Winters, do you have somewhere safe to go tonight? I have my own apartment, I said. Do you need assistance getting there? I can take the subway. We'll give you a ride, Officer Rodriguez said. Make sure you get to your door safely. I gathered my purse and my coat. The room was silent except for the ticking of Michael's expensive grandfather clock. As we walked toward the door, Sarah finally spoke. Mom, please. We were just trying to help. I stopped and turned around. Looked at her face, which was now streaked with tears. Looked at Michael, who was staring at the floor. At Jennifer, who was still holding that brochure for Sunset Manor. If you wanted to help me, I said quietly, you would have asked me what I needed. Instead of telling me what you thought was best for you. And then I walked out of that house. Out of that life where I was treated like a burden instead of a person. The police officers were true to their word. They drove me all the way back to my apartment on the Lower East Side. Officer Martinez even walked me up the 3 flights of stairs to my door, watching as I used my own keys to let myself into my own home. Mrs. Winters, she said before leaving, if you need resources for seniors living independently, there are programs that can help. Meal delivery, transportation, home health aides if you want them. Thank you, I said. I'll look into that. That night, I sat in my small apartment and tried to process what had happened. I made myself a cup of tea, the good kind I usually saved for special occasions. I sat in my favorite chair, the one that was probably older than my grandchildren but still perfectly comfortable. I looked around my space. Yes, it was small. Yes, it was old. But it was mine. Every piece of furniture held a memory. The couch where Harold and I used to watch old movies. The kitchen table where I'd helped my children with homework. The bookshelf filled with books I'd actually read, not just displayed for show like the ones in Michael's house. This was my home. And I had almost given it up without a fight. My phone rang around 10 o'clock. I recognized Michael's number and let it go to voicemail. It rang again an hour later. Sarah this time. I ignored that one too. The next morning, I had 17 missed calls and 12 voicemails. I listened to the first few. Michael's voice, tight with anger. Mom, what you did yesterday was embarrassing and uncalled for. We're family. We were trying to help you. Sarah, crying, Mom, please call me back. I'm sorry if we upset you, but you have to understand we're worried about you. Jennifer, cold and precise. Eleanor, I think you owe us an apology. We opened our home to you for Christmas and you repaid us by calling the police. This is exactly the kind of confused behavior we were talking about. Confused behavior. There it was again. Anytime I stood up for myself, anytime I disagreed with their plans for my life, I was confused. I deleted all the messages without listening to the rest. Instead, I got dressed and walked to the small market on Essex Street where I'd been shopping for years. Mrs. Chen, who owned the place, smiled when she saw me. Eleanor, how was your Christmas? Interesting, I said, picking out fresh fruit and vegetables. Very interesting. For the next week, my family continued their campaign. Calls. Texts. Sarah even showed up at my door one evening, but I pretended I wasn't home. Finally, I decided I needed help thinking through everything that had happened. I called the number Officer Martinez had given me for senior services and asked about counseling. That's how I ended up sitting in a small office in a community center on Houston Street, across from Dr. Patricia Williams, a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and elder rights. Tell me what brought you here, Eleanor, she said. And so I told her everything. Not just about Christmas Day, but about the years leading up to it. The slow erosion of my independence. The way my opinions had stopped mattering. The way my family had begun treating me like a problem instead of a person. How long has this been going on? Dr. Williams asked. I had to think about that. When did it start? Maybe 3 years ago, after I had a small fender bender in the grocery store parking lot. Nobody was hurt, but Michael had used it as evidence that I shouldn't be driving. Or maybe 5 years ago, when I'd gotten confused about what day my doctor's appointment was and missed it. Sarah had lectured me for 20 minutes about the importance of keeping track of my obligations. Or maybe it started 8 years ago, right after Harold died, when I was grieving and vulnerable and my children swooped in to help in ways that felt more like control. I think, I said slowly, it started when they decided I was old instead of just older. Dr. Williams nodded. That's a very insightful distinction. Tell me more about that. Over the next several weeks, I learned about something called elder abuse. I learned that it doesn't always look like violence or obvious neglect. Sometimes it looks like family members who gradually take away your choices. Who make decisions for you without asking what you want. Who use your age as an excuse to treat you like you're incompetent. I learned that I had the right to live where I chose, as long as I wasn't a danger to myself or others. I had the right to control my own finances unless a court determined I was unable to do so. I had the right to say no. Most importantly, I learned that none of these rights depended on whether my family agreed with my choices. Dr. Williams helped me draft a letter to my children. In it, I explained that I understood they were concerned about me, but that their concerns didn't give them the right to make decisions for me. I outlined the ways I would accept help if they offered it respectfully. And I made it clear that attempting to force me into a living situation I hadn't chosen was not acceptable. I sent the letter 3 weeks after Christmas. The response was swift and ugly. Michael called me, his voice shaking with rage. Mom, this is ridiculous. You're being manipulated by that therapist. She's probably billing Medicare for unnecessary sessions. Sarah was hurt and accusatory. I can't believe you think we would ever hurt you. After everything we've done for you. Everything they'd done for me. I thought about that phrase for a long time. What had they done for me, exactly? Michael had borrowed money from me repeatedly over the years but rarely paid it back. When I sold my house to help him with his down payment, he'd called it a gift even though we'd originally agreed it was a loan. Sarah called me when she needed babysitting but was always too busy when I needed help with something. She dropped her children off at my apartment for weekends and vacations, expecting me to pay for groceries and entertainment, but when I'd asked her to drive me to a doctor's appointment last year because the subway construction made the trip difficult, she'd been too busy. They'd both inherited money when Harold's life insurance paid out, but somehow my monthly expenses had become my problem alone. I started to see the pattern. I gave. They took. And somehow they'd convinced me that this was what family was supposed to look like. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was the way they'd slowly but systematically undermined my confidence in myself. Every time I forgot something minor, they treated it like evidence of decline. Every time I made a decision they disagreed with, they questioned my judgment. Every time I expressed an opinion that differed from theirs, they suggested I was confused. I had started to second-guess myself constantly. Am I remembering this correctly? Am I being reasonable? Maybe they're right and I am losing my ability to think clearly. But sitting in Dr. Williams' office, talking through these experiences with someone who listened without judging, I began to realize that my mind was just fine. I was 73, not dead. My memory wasn't perfect, but whose memory is? I sometimes forgot small details or got confused about dates, but I still paid my bills on time, managed my medication correctly, maintained my apartment, and navigated New York City public transportation like a champion. The problem wasn't my competence. The problem was that my family had decided my competence didn't matter because I was old. In February, something happened that crystallized everything for me. I got sick. Nothing serious, just a bad cold that lingered. But I was feeling weak and decided to call Sarah to see if she could pick up some groceries for me. "Mom, this is exactly what we were talking about at Christmas," she said. "You can't take care of yourself when you're sick. What if this had been something serious?" "I have a cold, Sarah. I'm not dying." "But what if you were? What if you fell in your apartment and couldn't get to the phone? What if you had a stroke? What if? Their favorite game. What if something terrible happened? Then their plan to control my life would be justified." "Sarah," I said, "what if you got hit by a bus tomorrow? Should we put you in a nursing home just in case?" "That's different, Mom." "How?" She couldn't answer that question, of course. Because there was no answer. The only difference was my age, and age alone wasn't a good enough reason to take away someone's independence. After I hung up the phone, I realized something important. I could either spend the rest of my life afraid of what might happen, or I could spend it living. I chose living. I called a grocery delivery service and had food brought to my apartment. I asked my neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, to check on me once a day. She was happy to help, and I returned the favor when her grandson needed someone to watch him after school while she worked. I recovered from my cold in a week, just like I had been recovering from illnesses for 73 years. But the incident made me realize something else. I needed to be proactive about planning for the future. Not because my family was right about me being incompetent, but because being prepared is different from being controlled. I made an appointment with an elder law attorney. Her name was Maria Santos, and her office was in a small building near City Hall. She was probably 55, with gray streaks in her black hair and the kind of direct, no-nonsense manner I appreciated. "What can I help you with, Mrs. Winters?" I told her about Christmas. About my family's behavior. About my fears that they would continue trying to control my life. "Have you executed any financial powers of attorney?" she asked. "No." "Good. Don't, unless you truly need help managing your affairs and you trust the person completely. And I mean completely." She helped me draft several documents. A healthcare directive that outlined exactly what kinds of medical interventions I did and didn't want. A financial power of attorney that would only go into effect if 2 doctors certified that I was unable to manage my own affairs. And most importantly, a letter of intent that clearly stated my wishes about where I wanted to live and who I wanted making decisions for me if I ever became unable to make them myself. "Your age alone," Maria said, "is not grounds for anyone to control your life. You have the right to make your own choices, even if other people think those choices are risky." "What if my family tries to force the issue again?" "Document everything. Keep records of your financial transactions to prove you're managing them appropriately. If they attempt to coerce you or threaten you, call the police again. Elder abuse is a crime in New York State." Walking out of Maria's office, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Powerful. Like I had some control over my own destiny. Spring came early that year. By March, the trees on my street were starting to bud, and I could smell change in the air. I hadn't spoken to Michael or Sarah since February. They'd stopped calling after I'd made it clear that I wouldn't be pressured into making major life changes to satisfy their convenience. Instead, I was building a different kind of life. I joined a senior center on the Lower East Side that offered activities and day trips. I met other people my age who were living independently and loving it. We went to museums together, took cooking classes, played cards on Thursday afternoons. I started volunteering at a literacy program, helping adults learn to read. It felt good to be useful in a way that didn't involve being taken advantage of. I even started dating. Well, sort of. There was a gentleman named Frank who I met at the senior center. He was 79, a widower who'd lost his wife 2 years before. We went to coffee dates and held hands during movies like teenagers. Frank had grown children too, but his relationship with them was nothing like mine. They called regularly to check on him, but they also respected his independence. They invited him for holidays but didn't make him feel like a burden. They offered help when he needed it but didn't insist on controlling his life. "How did you train them so well?" I asked him one day as we walked through Central Park. "I don't think I trained them," he said thoughtfully. "I think I just never stopped treating them like their opinions mattered, so they never stopped treating me like mine mattered." That hit me hard. Had I contributed to my own situation by always putting my children's needs before my own? By never setting boundaries about how they could treat me? Maybe. But it didn't matter now. What mattered was moving forward. In April, I got a call from Emma, my oldest grandchild. She was crying. "Grandma, I'm sorry about what happened at Christmas. I've been thinking about it, and it wasn't right." My heart jumped. Finally, someone in my family who could see the situation clearly. "Thank you for saying that, sweetheart. Dad and Mom are really angry that you won't talk to them." "I'm not trying to punish anyone," I said. "I'm just not willing to be treated like I'm incompetent anymore." "I get it," Emma said. "And I'm sorry it took me so long to call. I was afraid Dad would be mad at me." "You don't have to choose sides, Emma. I love all of you. I just need to be treated with respect." We talked for over an hour. She told me about school, about her boyfriend, about her plans for after graduation. Normal grandmother-granddaughter conversation. It felt wonderful. "Can I come visit you?" she asked. "Of course. Anytime." The following Saturday, Emma came to my apartment. She looked around with fresh eyes, the way you do when you're seeing a familiar place for the first time. "This is really nice, Grandma," she said. "It's small, but it's cozy. And it's so, you." We made lunch together in my tiny kitchen. She told me about her classes, about her future plans. I told her about my volunteering, about Frank, about the painting class I'd started taking. "You seem happy," she said. "Different than you were at Christmas." "I am happy," I realized. For the first time in years, I'm actually happy. "Dad says you're being stubborn. Your father thinks that standing up for myself is stubbornness." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you give him your keys that day? If you didn't want to?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. "Because I was scared," I said finally. "I was scared that if I said no, they would stop loving me. That I would end up completely alone. And now? Now I know that being alone is better than being controlled." Emma hugged me tight before she left. "I love you, Grandma. And I'm proud of you." Proud of me? When was the last time someone had said that? In May, Michael called. His voice was different, less demanding. "Mom, we need to talk." "About what?" "About Christmas. About everything." I agreed to meet him for coffee at a diner near his office in Midtown. Neutral territory. He looked older when I saw him. There were new lines around his eyes, and his hair was grayer than I remembered. "You look good, Mom," he said, and he seemed surprised. "Thank you." We ordered coffee and sat in uncomfortable silence for a few minutes. Finally, Michael spoke. "I've been talking to a counselor." That surprised me. Michael didn't believe in therapy. "Jennifer insisted," he said, reading my expression. "After what happened at Christmas. She said our marriage was in trouble if I didn't figure out how to deal with family problems better." "I see." "The therapist, she helped me understand some things. About how we've been treating you." I waited. I'd learned the value of silence in difficult conversations. "I still think living alone at your age is risky," he said. "But I understand that it's your choice to make." It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start. "And the keys?" I asked. He looked uncomfortable. "That was wrong. I can see that now. We should have talked to you about our concerns instead of just taking over." "Yes, you should have." "Can you forgive us?" I thought about that question. Forgiveness was complicated. I could forgive them for making mistakes out of misguided concern. But I couldn't go back to the relationship we'd had before, where my opinions didn't matter and my independence was constantly under threat. "I can forgive you," I said. "But things can't go back to the way they were." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if you want a relationship with me, it has to be based on respect. You can express concerns, but you can't make decisions for me. You can offer help, but you can't insist that I accept it." Michael nodded slowly. "The therapist said you might say something like that. And she said that was reasonable." We spent the next hour talking. Really talking, for the first time in years. I told him about my new life, my volunteer work, my friends at the senior center. He told me about the stress he'd been under at work, about how scared he'd been when he saw me aging, about how he'd thought controlling my environment was the same as protecting me. "I lost my father 8 years ago," he said. "I can't lose you too." "You're not going to lose me by treating me like an adult," I said. "You're going to lose me by treating me like a child." Before we parted, Michael made me a promise. "I won't try to control your life anymore. But I want to stay in touch. I want to know you're okay." "I'd like that too," I said. Sarah was harder. She called a week after my meeting with Michael, but her tone was defensive. "I hear you and Michael worked things out. We made a start. I hope you know that everything we did was out of love." There it was again. Love as an excuse for control. "Sarah, the way you show love matters more than your intentions." "I don't know what you mean." So I explained it to her. I told her about all the times over the years when she dismissed my opinions or made me feel like a burden. I reminded her of conversations where she'd treated me like I was losing my mind simply because I disagreed with her. She started crying. I never meant to hurt you, Mom. I know you didn't. But intention isn't magic. Good intentions don't erase the impact of hurtful actions. Sarah and I are still working on our relationship. Some days are better than others. But she's trying, and that matters. The grandchildren have been easier. Emma visits regularly now. Jake called me on my birthday. Even Sophia, who's typically absorbed in her own teenage world, sent me a text message asking about my painting class. Children are remarkably adaptable when the adults in their lives model healthy behavior. By summer, I had settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable and joyful. I spent mornings reading at my kitchen table with coffee and natural light. Afternoons were for activities, sometimes volunteer work, sometimes social time with friends, sometimes errands around the neighborhood that I handled myself. Thank you very much. Frank and I were getting serious. Well, as serious as two people in their 70s get. We weren't moving in together or anything dramatic like that, but we were talking about taking a trip together. Maybe a cruise, or a week in Florida. At our age, Frank said, why waste time playing games? Life's too short to pretend we don't enjoy each other's company. I was learning to embrace that philosophy in all areas of my life. Life's too short to tolerate disrespect. Too short to live according to other people's fear. Too short to apologize for taking up space in the world. One evening in late July, I was sitting on my fire escape watching the sunset when Mrs. Alvarez knocked on my door. Eleanor, come quickly, she said. There's something you need to see. She led me downstairs to the lobby, where a beautiful flower arrangement was waiting by my mailbox. The card read, Happy 74th birthday, Grandma. We love you. Emma, Jake, and Sophia. My birthday wasn't for another week, but they'd remembered. Without their parents reminding them. Without obligation or guilt. Just love. I carried the flowers upstairs and placed them on my kitchen table, where their bright colors caught the evening light streaming through my windows. That's when I realized how truly free I had become. For decades, I had measured my worth by how much my family needed me. How much money I could give them. How many problems I could solve for them. How many ways I could sacrifice my own needs for theirs. But now I was learning a different way to measure worth. By how much joy I brought to my days. By how many people I helped through my volunteer work. By how honestly I lived according to my own values. By how much love I was able to give and receive without keeping score. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had taken months of therapy, of learning to set boundaries, of building new relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. But here I was, 74 years old, sitting in my own apartment with flowers from grandchildren who chose to remember my birthday, planning a trip with a man who enjoyed my company, surrounded by friends who valued my opinions and contributions. I was not a burden. I was not a problem to be solved. I was not someone's age whose capabilities were predetermined by the number of years I'd been alive. I was Eleanor. I was a volunteer literacy teacher who helped adults learn to read. I was a friend who could be counted on. I was a grandmother worth remembering. I was a woman who had learned, maybe later than ideal but not too late, how to stand up for herself. 3 days before my actual birthday, Sarah called. Mom, we'd like to take you out for dinner. For your birthday. I almost said yes automatically, the way I always had. But then I paused. Where were you thinking? That Italian place you like on Mulberry Street. Who's we? Michael and Jennifer. Rob and me. The kids if they're free. I'd like that, I said. But I have some conditions. Conditions? I choose my own meal. I pay for myself. No one lectures me about my choices or gives me unsolicited advice about my life. And we don't discuss my living arrangements, my finances, or my health unless I bring them up. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Okay, Mom. Those seem reasonable. The dinner was actually pleasant. We talked about Emma's graduation plans, about Jake's summer job, about Sophia's interest in joining the debate team. Michael asked about my painting class, and seemed genuinely interested in my answer. Jennifer was still cool toward me, but she was polite. Rome wasn't built in a day. When the check came, I put down my credit card before anyone could object. Michael started to reach for his wallet, but Sarah put a hand on his arm. Mom's got this one, she said. Such a small thing, paying for my own meal. But it represented something important. I was no longer the charity case who needed to be taken care of. I was an independent adult who could cover her own expenses and make her own choices. After dinner, as we stood on the sidewalk saying goodbye, Emma hugged me tight. Grandma, you seem so much happier now. I am happier, sweetheart. I'm sorry it took us so long to figure out how to treat you right. Out of the mouths of babes. This 22-year-old had understood something that had taken her parents months of therapy to grasp. You're figuring it out now, I said. That's what matters. As I rode the subway home, I thought about the past 8 months. The humiliation of that Christmas day seemed like something that had happened to a different person. That Eleanor had been afraid, diminished, apologetic for existing. This Eleanor was none of those things. I thought about the keys, too. How symbolic that moment had been. They'd wanted to take away my keys because keys represent freedom. The freedom to come and go as you please. The freedom to lock your door and know you're safe. The freedom to start your car and drive wherever you want, whenever you want. When I gave up those keys, even temporarily, I was giving up my freedom. I was agreeing to let other people control my movements, my choices, my life. Getting them back hadn't just been about reclaiming my property. It had been about reclaiming my right to self-determination. The subway rocked gently as we moved through the tunnel. I watched my reflection in the dark window and smiled at what I saw. I looked like a woman who knew her own worth. Who had learned the difference between love and control. Who had discovered that being alone didn't mean being lonely, and that setting boundaries didn't mean stopping love. At home, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my favorite chair with a book. Outside my window, the city hummed with life. Somewhere out there, other 74-year-olds were probably facing the same battles I had fought. Family members who confused concern with control. Adult children who couldn't see the difference between keeping someone safe and keeping someone prisoner. I hoped they would find the strength to stand up for themselves the way I had. I hoped they would discover, as I had, that you're never too old to reclaim your dignity. The following week, I answered my phone to hear a voice I didn't recognize. Mrs. Winters? My name is Grace Chen. I got your number from the senior center. I was wondering, could we meet for coffee? What about? Your story. About what happened with your family. My sister told me about it, and I think I'm going through something similar. Grace was 68, recently widowed, with 2 adult sons who had decided she could no longer live in the house she'd shared with her husband for 40 years. They keep saying it's too big for me, she said as we sat in the coffee shop on Houston Street. That I can't maintain it by myself. That I should sell it and move somewhere smaller. Do you want to sell it? No. It's my home. My husband and I raised our children there. I know every corner of that house. But they keep wearing me down, telling me I'm being stubborn and impractical. I told Grace my story. Everything that had happened since that Christmas day. How I'd fought back. How I'd gotten help. How I'd learned to set boundaries. You called the police? Grace asked, her eyes wide. I did. And it was the right thing to do. What my family was trying to do to me was a form of elder abuse, even though they thought they were helping. I never thought of it that way. That's how it starts, I said. They convince us that we don't know what's best for ourselves. That our age automatically makes us incompetent. But being older doesn't mean being helpless, and it doesn't mean other people get to make our choices for us. Grace and I met for coffee regularly after that. I helped her find a therapist. I gave her the name of my lawyer. I was there to listen when she had to have difficult conversations with her sons. It took her longer than it had taken me to stand up for herself, but she got there. Last I heard, she was still living in her house, had hired a part-time housekeeper to help with the heavy cleaning, and had told her sons that she would ask for their help when she needed it but wouldn't tolerate being pressured into major life changes. You saved my life, she told me one day. You saved your own life, I corrected her. I just showed you it was possible. That conversation made me realize something. My experience with my family, as painful as it had been, had taught me something valuable. And that knowledge could help other people in similar situations. I started volunteering at the senior center as a peer counselor, helping other older adults who were dealing with controlling family members. I led a support group called Setting Boundaries After 60. We met every Tuesday afternoon in a small conference room that smelled like coffee and hope. The stories I heard were heartbreaking and familiar. Adult children who took over their parents' finances without permission. Grandchildren who were taught to see their grandparents as burdens rather than people. Families who used guilt and emotional manipulation to control older relatives. But I also saw transformation. I watched people who had been diminished and demoralized learn to stand up for themselves. I saw them reclaim their independence and their dignity. One woman, Martha, had been living with her daughter's family for 2 years after a minor fall. She was treated like a live-in babysitter, expected to watch the grandchildren and do housework but given no privacy or independence. I have my own social security, Martha told the group. I could afford my own apartment. But when I mention it, they act like I'm talking about jumping off a bridge. It took Martha 6 months to work up the courage to get her own place, but she did it. Her daughter was furious at first, then manipulative, then finally accepting when she realized Martha was serious about maintaining her independence. I see my grandchildren twice a week now instead of every day, Martha reported to the group. But when I see them, I'm their grandmother, not their babysitter. And when I go home, it's to my own space. Stories like Martha's reminded me why what happened to me on Christmas Day was so important, not just for me, but for everyone who hears about it. We live in a society that treats aging like a disease instead of a natural part of life. We assume that reaching a certain age automatically means losing the right to make your own decisions. We confuse physical changes with mental incompetence. We let fear drive us to control the people we claim to love. But age is not a disqualification from personhood. Being 70 or 80 or 90 doesn't mean you stop having preferences, opinions, and the right to live according to your own values. As I sit here now, at 74, I can honestly say I'm living the best years of my life. Not because everything is perfect, but because I'm living authentically. I make my own choices. I spend my time on activities that matter to me. I surround myself with people who respect me as an individual. My relationship with my children isn't the same as it was before that Christmas Day, but it's better in many ways. It's based on honesty now instead of obligation. They can't take my compliance for granted anymore, which means when I do choose to help them or spend time with them, it's a genuine gift rather than an expected sacrifice. Michael still worries about me living alone, but he expresses that worry respectfully now. He might say, "Mom, I know you're handling things well, but I'd feel better if you had a landline in case your cell phone dies." That's very different from, "Mom, you're too old to live alone." Sarah has learned to ask instead of assuming. "Mom, would you like help with your grocery shopping this week?" instead of, "Mom, you shouldn't be carrying heavy bags at your age." The grandchildren have relationships with me now instead of just obligations. They call because they want to talk to me, not because their parents made them. They ask about my life because they're genuinely interested, not because they're checking up on me. Frank and I did take that cruise, by the way. 10 days in the Caribbean. We danced every night, stayed up late talking on the deck under the stars, and generally acted like the happy couple we are. "People probably think we're ridiculous," Frank said one evening as we watched the sunset from our balcony. "People can think whatever they want," I said. "I'm done living my life according to other people's expectations." That's become my motto. I'm done living my life according to other people's expectations. Too old to fall in love? Says who? Too old to travel alone? According to whom? Too old to make my own decisions about where to live and how to spend my money? Based on what authority? Age brings challenges, certainly. My arthritis makes some activities more difficult. My energy isn't what it was 20 years ago. I'm more careful on stairs than I used to be. But challenges aren't the same as incompetence. Limitations aren't the same as helplessness. Being more vulnerable in some ways doesn't mean being vulnerable in all ways. I've learned to ask for help when I need it, but I've also learned the difference between accepting help and surrendering control. Help is when someone offers to carry your groceries because the bags are heavy. Control is when someone tells you what groceries you're allowed to buy. Help is when someone drives you to a doctor's appointment because parking is difficult. Control is when someone insists on coming into the appointment with you and answering questions on your behalf. Help is when someone explains new technology to you because it's confusing. Control is when someone takes over your finances because they assume you're too old to understand them. The distinction matters. And we teach people how to treat us by what we're willing to accept. I think about that Christmas Day often. The feeling of those keys sliding out of my hand. The sense of powerlessness as my family decided my future without consulting me. The humiliation of being treated like a child at the age of 73. But I also think about what came after. The moment I decided to fight back. The call to 911 that changed everything. The slow, sometimes difficult process of rebuilding my life on my own terms. That was the day I stopped being old and started being older. There's a difference. Being old, in the way society defines it, means being done. Finished. A problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. Being older means having lived long enough to know what matters. Having enough experience to make good decisions. Having the wisdom that comes with decades of navigating life's challenges. I am older now. But I am not old. I have learned that independence doesn't mean isolation. I have wonderful friends, a loving relationship with Frank, and meaningful connections with my grandchildren. I have a support network of people who care about me as a person rather than seeing me as a responsibility. I have learned that dignity is not negotiable. I will not accept disrespect in exchange for company. I will not tolerate control disguised as concern. I will not apologize for taking up space in the world. I have learned that it's never too late to change the patterns in your life. Even at 74, I was able to transform relationships that had become toxic. Even after decades of putting other people's needs before my own, I was able to learn to value myself. Most importantly, I have learned that love and control are not the same thing. Real love supports your independence, even when that independence involves risk. Real love respects your right to make your own choices, even when those choices are different from what others would choose for you. The people who truly love you will worry about you sometimes. They will express their concerns. They will offer help. But they will not try to take over your life in the name of protecting you. Anyone who attempts to control you, manipulate you, or override your wishes is not acting out of love, no matter what they claim. They are acting out of their own fear, their own need for control, their own inability to accept that other people have the right to live differently than they would prefer. I share this story not because I want pity or admiration, but because I want other people to know that it's possible to stand up for yourself at any age. It's possible to reclaim your independence even after you've given it away. It's possible to transform relationships with family members who have forgotten how to treat you with respect. It's not easy. It requires courage and sometimes professional help. It might mean accepting that some relationships will change or even end if the other person isn't willing to build a respectful dynamic. But it's worth it. Your dignity is worth it. Your right to self-determination is worth it. Your happiness is worth it. You are not too old to deserve respect. You are not too old to have your opinions matter. You are not too old to live according to your own values and make your own choices. And if anyone in your life is telling you otherwise, they are wrong. Age does not disqualify you from personhood. I want to end by saying something to anyone who recognizes their own family in this story. If your parents or grandparents are getting older, please remember that they are still individuals with their own preferences, opinions, and rights. Your concern for their welfare is natural and loving, but concern should never become control. Express your worries. Offer your help. Share your perspective. But ultimately, respect their right to live their own lives, even if you disagree with their choices. The goal should be to keep them as safe as possible while preserving as much independence as possible, not to eliminate all risk by eliminating all choice. And to anyone who sees themselves in my story, who feels like their family is slowly taking over their life in the name of love, I want you to know that you have options. You have rights. You have the power to change your situation, even if it feels impossible right now. Start small. Set one boundary. Say no to one thing. Ask for help from a professional counselor, a senior services coordinator, or even a trusted friend who will listen without judging. You are not a burden. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a person who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. It's never too late to reclaim your life. Have you ever lived through something similar to what I've shared today? Or perhaps you know someone who has faced these challenges with family members who confused control with care? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart or opened your eyes to something you hadn't considered before, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these difficult but important stories, and it might help this message reach someone who desperately needs to hear that they're not alone and they're not powerless. Remember, we're never too old to stand up for ourselves, and we're never too old to deserve respect. Now, let me tell you about something that happened just last month that proves how far I've come, and how the lessons I learned continue to serve me every day. I was at the grocery store, the same one where Mrs. Chen always greets me with such warmth. I was standing in the produce section, carefully selecting oranges for the fresh juice I've started making for Frank and me in the mornings, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Eleanor?" I turned around to see Jennifer, Michael's wife, standing there with her cart. She looked uncomfortable, uncertain. We hadn't spoken one-on-one since that Christmas day 17 months ago. "Hello, Jennifer," I said, continuing to examine the oranges in my hands. "How are you?" she asked, and for the first time in all the years I'd known her, she sounded genuinely interested in the answer. "I'm very well, thank you. And you?" I'm good." She paused, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "Eleanor, I was wondering if we could talk sometime. Maybe over coffee?" The old Eleanor would have said yes immediately, eager to please, grateful for any attention from her daughter-in-law. This Eleanor took a moment to consider. "What would you like to talk about, Jennifer?" "About Christmas. About everything that happened after. About how wrong I was." I could see this was difficult for her. Jennifer wasn't someone who admitted to being wrong about anything, ever. She was used to being in control, used to being right, used to having the last word in every conversation. "I see," I said, placing the oranges in my cart. "And what brought about this change of perspective?" "Therapy," she said simply. "Michael and I have been in couples counseling since last spring. Our therapist helped me see some things about myself that I didn't like. About how I treat people. About how I treat you." I studied her face. She looked tired, older than I remembered. There were new lines around her eyes, and her usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled. "I'm willing to have that conversation," I said finally. "But it has to be an honest one. No pretending things were different than they were. No expecting me to just forgive and forget without any real accountability." She nodded quickly. "I understand. I know I have a lot to make up for." We arranged to meet the following Tuesday at a small cafe on Spring Street. I chose the place because it was public but quiet, somewhere we could talk without being overheard but where I wouldn't feel trapped if the conversation went badly. The night before our meeting, I called Dr. Williams. I'd stopped seeing her regularly months ago, but she told me I could always call if I needed to talk through something difficult. "How are you feeling about this conversation with Jennifer?" she asked. "Nervous," I admitted. "But also, curious, I guess." She's the last person I ever expected to admit she was wrong about anything. "What's your goal for the meeting?" I thought about that. I want to hear what she has to say. I want to understand if she really gets it, or if this is just another way to try to control the narrative. "And what will you do if it's the latter?" "Walk away," I said without hesitation. "I know my worth now, Dr. Williams. I'm not going to let anyone diminish it again, even in the name of family peace." When I arrived at the cafe, Jennifer was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cappuccinos in front of her. "I ordered for you," she said as I sat down. "I remember you like cappuccino." Actually, I preferred plain coffee, but Jennifer had never asked about my preferences, just assumed she knew them. However, I decided this wasn't the hill to die on. "Thank you," I said, taking a small sip. We sat in awkward silence for a moment. Then Jennifer took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology," she said. "A real one. Not the kind where I apologize for your feelings being hurt, but an apology for my actions." This was unexpected. The Jennifer I knew would never admit to being at fault for anything. "I'm listening," I said. "I was controlling. I was dismissive. I treated you like you were incompetent instead of just older. I made decisions about your life without considering what you wanted or needed. And I convinced Michael that we were doing the right thing when we were actually doing the selfish thing." She paused, looking down at her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "I was so focused on what would make our lives easier, what would give me less to worry about, what would fit into our convenient narrative about aging and family responsibility, that I completely ignored your humanity." The word humanity hit me hard. That's exactly what had been stripped away from me during all those conversations about my future. My humanity. My right to be seen as a whole person instead of just a problem to be solved. "What made you realize this?" I asked. Jennifer laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Michael and I almost got divorced. Did you know that?" I shook my head. After what happened at Christmas, after the police came, Michael became obsessed with proving that we'd been right. That you were declining, that we'd acted out of love, that calling the police was evidence of your confusion. But I could see how it was eating him alive. He couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate at work. He was angry all the time. She took a sip of her cappuccino before continuing. "I suggested therapy because I thought a professional would take our side. I thought they would validate our concerns and help us figure out how to get you to see reason. But that's not what happened. No. Dr. Ramirez, our therapist, she listened to our story and then asked us some questions that made me really uncomfortable. Like, would you accept this treatment from your own adult children? And if Eleanor was 43 instead of 73, would you consider your behavior appropriate? And what specific evidence do you have that Eleanor is incompetent rather than just making choices you disagree with?" I could imagine how those questions had landed. "It was awful," Jennifer continued. "Because when I really thought about it, honestly, I couldn't point to any real evidence that you were declining. You managed your money fine. You maintained your apartment. You navigated the city independently. You just made different choices than we would have made. And that was threatening to you." Yes. The admission came out like an exhale she'd been holding for months. It was so threatening. Because if you could live independently and happily at 73, what did that say about the assumptions I'd been making about my own future? What did that say about the way I'd been taught to think about aging? This was more insight than I'd ever heard from Jennifer. I found myself leaning forward, genuinely interested in her perspective. "I realized," she said, "that I was projecting my own fears onto you. I'm terrified of getting old, Eleanor. Terrified of becoming irrelevant, of losing control, of being dependent on other people. And instead of dealing with those fears, I was trying to rush you into the kind of dependence I was afraid of for myself." Why? Because if I could convince myself that dependency was normal and inevitable, then I wouldn't have to be afraid of it anymore. I could just accept it as the natural order of things. I sat back in my chair, processing this. Jennifer had just articulated something I'd never quite been able to put into words. The way adult children sometimes rush their parents into dependency not out of love, but out of their own fear of aging. "And the therapy helped you see this?" "The therapy and—" She hesitated. "This might sound strange, but I started volunteering at a senior center." "You did?" Dr. Ramirez suggested it. She said I needed to spend time around older adults who were living full, independent lives. To challenge my assumptions about what aging looks like. Jennifer went on to tell me about the people she'd met. 80-year-olds who were learning new languages. 75-year-olds who were starting new businesses. 90-year-olds who were traveling the world. "I met this woman, Dorothy. She's 86 and she just finished writing her first novel. Can you imagine? Her first novel at 86. And when I asked her why she waited so long, she said, I didn't wait. I just lived my life until I was ready to write, and now I'm ready. There were tears in Jennifer's eyes now. I realized that I'd been thinking about aging all wrong. I thought it was just decline and loss and dependence. But these people showed me that aging can also be about wisdom and freedom and finally having the courage to do things you never did when you were younger. Like standing up for yourself, I said quietly. Exactly like that. She reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. Eleanor, what you did that Christmas day, it wasn't the action of someone who was confused or declining. It was the action of someone who knew her own worth and refused to be diminished. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both lost in our own thoughts. I need you to know, Jennifer said finally, that I don't expect forgiveness. I know I hurt you. I know I contributed to making you feel small and unwanted and incompetent. I know that saying sorry doesn't undo the damage. No, it doesn't, I agreed. But it's a start. What would it take, do you think, to rebuild some kind of relationship? I'm not asking to go back to how things were. I understand that's not possible. But maybe we could find a way forward. I thought about her question. The old Eleanor would have rushed to reassure her, to make her feel better, to smooth over any discomfort. But I'd learned the value of sitting with difficult emotions instead of trying to fix them immediately. It would take time, I said. And it would take you continuing to do the work to understand your own motivations and biases. And it would mean accepting that I'm going to keep living my life according to my own values, even when they're different from yours. I can do that, she said quickly. And, I continued, it would mean you actively working to repair the damage you helped cause with the rest of the family. Sophia barely speaks to me. Jake thinks I'm some kind of troublemaker. That didn't happen in a vacuum. Jennifer's face flushed. She knew I was right. I've already started talking to the kids, she said. Explaining our mistakes. Helping them understand that what happened at Christmas wasn't your fault. Good. We talked for another hour. Jennifer told me about the changes she was making and how she thought about aging and independence. I told her about my new life, my volunteer work, my relationship with Frank, my painting classes. You seem so different, she said at one point. Happier. More present. I am different, I said. I finally learned how to put myself first without feeling guilty about it. When we got up to leave, Jennifer asked if she could hug me. I said yes, and for the first time in all the years I'd known her, the hug felt genuine. Thank you, she said. For giving me the chance to apologize properly. For not writing me off completely. Thank you, I replied, for doing the hard work to understand what really happened. That means more to me than you know. As I walked home, I reflected on how different this conversation had been from what I might have expected a year ago. The old Eleanor would have been eager to forgive, desperate to restore harmony, willing to minimize her own hurt to make everyone else comfortable. This Eleanor had been willing to listen, but she'd also held Jennifer accountable. She'd been open to the possibility of rebuilding a relationship, but she hadn't rushed to repair it at her own expense. I felt proud of myself. Not vindictive or self-righteous, just proud. I had handled a difficult conversation with grace while still protecting my own boundaries. That evening, I called Emma to tell her about the conversation. Wow, Grandma, she said. That must have been really hard for Jennifer. She's not used to admitting when she's wrong. No, she's not. But she did it anyway. That takes courage. Are you going to be friends with her now? I don't know if we'll ever be friends, I said honestly. But maybe we can find a way to be civil family members who respect each other. That would be enough. Emma was quiet for a moment. Grandma, can I ask you something? Of course. How did you learn to do this? To stand up for yourself but not be mean about it? To set boundaries without being cruel? It was a good question. A year ago, I wouldn't have known how to do any of those things. Therapy helped, I said. Learning about the difference between being assertive and being aggressive. Learning that I could protect myself without attacking other people. But it's more than that, isn't it? She was right. I think the biggest thing was learning that my worth doesn't depend on other people's approval. Once I truly believed that, I didn't need to be mean to people who disagreed with me, because their disagreement didn't threaten my sense of self. That's really wise, Grandma. Wise. When had I become someone people described as wise? The next week brought another unexpected encounter. I was in Central Park, sitting on a bench feeding the pigeons and reading a book, when a woman about my age approached me. Excuse me, she said hesitantly. Are you Eleanor Winters? I looked up, not recognizing her. Yes, I am. Do we know each other? No, but I know your story. My daughter goes to the senior center where you volunteer. She told me about your support group, about what you did when your family tried to take away your independence. She sat down beside me without being invited, which normally would have bothered me, but something in her expression made me stay open. My name is Rose, she said. And I think I need your help. Rose was 79, a widow whose 3 adult children lived in different states. 2 months earlier, they'd had what they called a family meeting over video chat and decided that she needed to move to assisted living. They didn't ask me what I wanted, Rose said, her voice shaking with frustration. They just presented it as a done deal. They'd already researched facilities, already made appointments for tours. They said they were worried about me living alone after Dad died. How long has your husband been gone? I asked. 6 months, she said. And yes, I'm still grieving. Yes, I'm still adjusting. But that doesn't mean I'm incompetent. I listened as Rose told me a story that felt achingly familiar. Children who called in frequently but assumed they knew what was best for their mother. Medical appointments that were scheduled without her input. Financial decisions that were made for her own good. The worst part, Rose said, is that they keep talking about me like I'm not there. During the video call, they spent 20 minutes discussing my situation while I sat right there on the screen. At one point, my youngest son actually said, "Well, Mom's not really in a position to make rational decisions right now." My heart ached for her. "What did you say?" "Nothing," she admitted. I was so shocked that I just sat there. But afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept wondering when I stopped being a person to them and started being a problem. We talked for over an hour. I told Rose about my own experience, about the resources I'd found, about the importance of getting professional help to navigate these difficult family dynamics. "The thing is," Rose said as we were wrapping up our conversation, "I don't want to hurt my relationship with my children. I love them. But I also can't let them bulldoze me just because they think they know better." "Those things don't have to be mutually exclusive," I said. "You can love your children and still insist on being treated with respect. In fact, teaching them how to treat you respectfully might be one of the greatest gifts you can give them." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if you don't stand up for yourself now, you're teaching them that it's okay to override the wishes of people they claim to love. Is that the lesson you want them to carry into their own relationships?" Rose's eyes widened. "I never thought of it that way." And, I continued, "What example are you setting for their children? Do you want your grandchildren to grow up thinking that getting older means losing the right to make your own decisions?" "No," she said firmly. "No, I don't." I gave Rose the contact information for Dr. Williams and for Maria, my attorney. I also invited her to come to our support group the following Tuesday. "Will you really be there?" she asked. "This is so scary to do alone." "I'll be there," I promised. The following Tuesday, Rose came to our support group. She was nervous, sitting on the edge of her chair and gripping her purse like a lifeline. But as she listened to other people share their stories, I watched her relax. When it was her turn to talk, she spoke quietly but clearly about her situation with her children. "I keep thinking I'm being selfish," she said. "They say they just want what's best for me. But who gets to decide what's best for you?" asked Martha, the woman who'd moved out of her daughter's house and into her own apartment. I do." "That's not a question, dear," said another group member, a 91-year-old woman named Betty who'd recently told her son she wouldn't be moving to Florida to live near him. "You absolutely get to decide what's best for you." Over the next several weeks, I watched Rose transform. She started seeing Dr. Williams. She consulted with Maria about her legal rights. Most importantly, she started practicing in the group how to have difficult conversations with her children. "I need to tell you that I've decided not to move to assisted living right now," she practiced saying. "I understand that you're worried about me, and I appreciate your concern. But I'm not ready to give up my independence." "What if they argue with you?" asked another group member. "I'll say that I'm not asking for their permission. I'm informing them of my decision." It took Rose 3 weeks to work up the courage to call her children and have that conversation. But she did it. And while they weren't happy about her decision, they eventually accepted it when they realized she was serious. "They're coming to visit next month," Rose reported to the group. "All 3 of them. They want to see for themselves how I'm managing." "How do you feel about that?" I asked. "Nervous," she said honestly. "But also, proud, I guess." I stood up for myself. I said no to something I didn't want. And the world didn't end. Stories like Rose's became common in our support group. People who had been diminished and demoralized by well-meaning family members slowly learning to reclaim their voices and their choices. There was Arthur, whose wife had died and whose children immediately assumed he couldn't manage his own household. He'd allowed them to hire a live-in housekeeper he didn't want and couldn't afford, just to keep the peace. Through our group, he found the courage to let the housekeeper go and prove to his children that he was perfectly capable of caring for himself. There was Maria, whose adult daughter had convinced her to sell her car after a minor parking lot incident. Maria had given up her independence and spent months feeling trapped in her apartment, dependent on others for even basic errands. With support from the group, she took a defensive driving course, bought a new car, and told her daughter that her transportation was her own business. There was Robert, an 85-year-old former engineer whose son had taken over his finances without permission, claiming his father was too old to understand modern banking. Robert had felt humiliated and helpless until he learned about elder financial abuse laws. With legal help, he regained control of his own money and established boundaries with his son. Each story reminded me that what happened to me that Christmas wasn't unique. All over the country, older adults were being infantilized and controlled by family members who confused their own fear and convenience with their loved ones' best interests. But each story also reminded me that it was possible to fight back. That even in your 70s, 80s, or 90s, you could reclaim your dignity and your right to self-determination. 6 months after my conversation with Jennifer, Michael called to invite me to Emma's college graduation. "It's next month," he said. "We'd really like you to be there." "Of course I'll be there," I said. "Emma's worked so hard for this." "Mom," Michael's voice was uncertain, "would you like to sit with the family? I know things have been complicated, but..." "I'd like that," I said. "Thank you for asking." The graduation was held on Columbia's campus on a beautiful May morning. I wore a new dress that I'd bought specifically for the occasion, bright blue with tiny white flowers, nothing like the subdued colors I used to choose to avoid drawing attention to myself. Frank came with me. I'd introduced him to Emma a few months earlier, and they'd hit it off immediately. She'd even started calling him Grandpa Frank, which made both of us teary-eyed with joy. At the ceremony, I sat between Michael and Sarah, with Frank on my other side. For the first time in years, it felt like I was actually part of the family instead of just being tolerated by them. When Emma's name was called and she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, I felt pride surge through me. This brilliant, kind young woman was my granddaughter. And she'd learned something from watching me stand up for myself. She'd learned that it was possible to be loving and respectful while still maintaining your boundaries. After the ceremony, we all went to a restaurant in Little Italy for lunch. The conversation was relaxed, genuinely warm. Michael asked about my volunteer work and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. Sarah told me about a book she thought I'd enjoy. The grandchildren included me in their conversations instead of just politely acknowledging my presence. But the moment that meant the most to me came when Emma stood up to make a toast. "I want to thank everyone who supported me through college," she said, raising her glass. "My parents, who definitely did their best even when they were being overprotective." Everyone laughed. "My siblings, who let me borrow their stuff and only sometimes told on me." More laughter. "And I want to especially thank my grandma Eleanor," she continued, looking directly at me, "who taught me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, and that loving someone means respecting their right to make their own choices." She paused, her voice getting softer. "Grandma, watching you these past 2 years has taught me more about dignity and courage than any class I've ever taken. You showed me what it looks like to love yourself enough to demand respect. You showed me that being kind doesn't mean being weak, and that setting boundaries doesn't mean being mean." Emma's eyes were bright with tears now. "You taught me that we're never too old to grow, to change, to become more ourselves. And you taught me that real love supports people's independence, even when it scares us to let them make their own choices." She raised her glass higher. "So here's to Grandma Eleanor, who taught me that age is just a number, and that as long as we're alive, we have the right to keep living according to our own values." Everyone raised their glasses and drank. I felt tears streaming down my face, but they were happy tears. Proud tears. After lunch, as we were walking back to the subway, Jennifer fell into step beside me. "That was a beautiful toast," she said. "It was," I agreed. "I'm so proud of Emma." "She's right, you know," Jennifer said quietly. "About what you taught her. What you taught all of us." I looked at her, surprised. "I mean it," she continued. "I know I'm still learning, still working on changing how I think about aging and independence. But you showed us all that respect isn't something you lose when you get older. It's something you have to keep insisting on." We walked in comfortable silence for a moment. "Eleanor," Jennifer said as we approached the subway entrance, "I want you to know that I tell people about you. About what you did. About what you taught me." "What do you mean?" "I mean that when I see other people my age talking about their elderly parents like their children, or making decisions for them without asking what they want, I speak up. I tell them about you. I tell them that concern doesn't give you the right to control someone's life." I felt a warm glow of satisfaction. If my story was helping other families avoid the mistakes mine had made, then all the pain and struggle had been worth something. That evening, as Frank and I sat in my apartment sharing a bottle of wine and talking about the day, I reflected on how far I'd come since that terrible Christmas afternoon. 2.5 years ago, I had been diminished. Afraid. Apologetic for existing. I had measured my worth by how much other people needed me, and I had been willing to sacrifice my independence to maintain relationships that were actually harming me. Now, at 76, I was living fully. I woke up each morning excited about the day ahead. I had meaningful work that made me feel valuable. I had relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I had learned to ask for help when I needed it without feeling like a burden. Most importantly, I had learned that being older didn't mean being less. It meant being more aware of what mattered, more confident in my own judgment, more willing to insist on being treated with dignity. You know what I think? Frank said as we watched the sunset from my window. What? I think you're just getting started. He was right. At 76, I felt like I was just beginning to understand what it meant to live authentically. To make choices based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. To love without keeping score, to help without sacrificing myself, to accept help without surrendering my independence. Last month, I got a call from Grace Chen, the woman whose sons had been pressuring her to sell her house. We'd stayed in touch over the past 2 years, celebrating her victories and supporting her through the difficult moments. Eleanor, she said, excitement bubbling in her voice, I have the most wonderful news. What is it? My oldest grandson is getting married, and they want to have the wedding reception in my backyard. Can you believe it? They said it would be more meaningful than some fancy venue because my house is where the family has always gathered for important occasions. I felt tears spring to my eyes. Grace's house, the same house her sons had insisted was too big and too much work for her, was now being recognized as the family's heart. They said they want their marriage to be blessed by the same walls that witnessed their grandparents' love, Grace continued. And you know what the best part is? What? My sons are the ones who suggested it. They've come to understand that keeping me in my home wasn't about my stubbornness. It was about preserving something important for the whole family. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my chair and let myself feel deeply proud. Not just of Grace, but of all the people in our support group who had learned to stand up for themselves. Of all the families who had learned to support their older members without controlling them. But also of myself. Of the woman I had become when I finally learned to value my own opinion as much as everyone else's. The keys that slipped from my fingers that Christmas Day had been more than just metal objects. They had been symbols of my freedom, my autonomy, my right to make my own choices about how to live. Getting them back hadn't just been about reclaiming my property. It had been about reclaiming my personhood. About insisting that age wasn't a disqualification from dignity. About teaching my family, and myself, that love and control weren't the same thing. Now, as I hold those same keys every day, they remind me of who I am. Not someone's burden. Not someone's obligation. Not a problem to be solved or a risk to be managed. I am Eleanor. I am 76 years old. I volunteer my time helping others learn to read. I paint watercolors that aren't very good but bring me joy. I'm in love with a man who sees me as an adventure rather than an obligation. I have friends who value my opinions and family members who have learned to respect my choices. I am living proof that it's never too late to insist on being treated with dignity. That age is not a sentence to irrelevance. That the people who truly love us will support our independence, even when it scares them. If you're watching this and you see yourself in my story, whether you're the older adult being controlled or the adult child who's confused concern with control, please know that it's possible to change these patterns. It's possible to build relationships based on respect rather than fear. It's possible to love someone while still allowing them to make their own choices. It's possible to express concern without taking over. It's possible to offer help without demanding compliance. And if you're older and you feel like your family is slowly taking away your independence, please know that you have more power than you think. You have rights. You have options. You have the ability to stand up for yourself, no matter how old you are. Start small. Set one boundary. Say no to one thing you don't want. Ask for help from a professional counselor, a senior services organization, or a support group like the one I facilitate. You are not too old to deserve respect. You are not too old to have your opinions matter. You are not too old to live according to your own values. And remember, the keys to your independence are in your hands. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for your support. And remember, we're never too old to stand up for ourselves, and we're never too old to deserve respect.